Mm. God bless you. God bless you again. Hi there. I just realized I was saying God bless you into a live mic. Oh well. I guess you guys have heard that before, right? Hey, Dolores. Hi, Steph. How are you? Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Dolores. Hey, nice to see you, Kay. Steve, the Transition Integrity Project, the TIP, Steve Gonzo says. In every exercise, both teams sought to mobilize their supporters to take to the streets. Team Biden repeatedly called for peaceful protests, while Team Trump encouraged provocateurs to incite violence then used the resulting chaos to justify sending federalized guard units or active duty military personnel into American cities to restore order, leading to still more violence. Hashtag bipartisan. Kay said, watch a great interview with Thomas Frank on Progressive Democrats of America. Alice Little said, laugh out loud. I asked a professor once why I even say that. You asked a professor once why you even say what, Alice? Why you even say laugh out loud? Oh, God bless you. Yeah. Why I even say that? He looked at me like I was stupid and said, during the plague, the first sign you had it was sneezing. So if you sneezed, people thought you were pretty much dead and blessed you. Ah, a plausible story. I thought it was something like that, except I thought in more recent times they noticed that when you sneeze, for a moment there, you cease to breathe in. So the story I heard is that they were blessing you so that you would breathe in again. Deborah says, hi, I'm over Biden. We're all over Biden. That's not the question. The question is whether we're going to do whatever we can to defeat Trump. That doesn't necessarily mean voting for Biden, because there are only certain states in which it's going to be close. So if you don't vote for Biden in the other states, that's not going to be a problem for Biden, but it may strengthen third parties and get them a high enough percentage of the vote that they would have to be considered for the debates next time around, which would be an unlikely but very good outcome. I say unlikely because they have to really gain a lot of support. Alice Little says, BusinessInsider.com, Trump is normalizing the possibility of violence surrounding the 2020 election. Yes, we covered that last night, that is, when I did a program on the article from the American Prospect by Dave Dayen called The Winter of Our Discontent. So you might want to look up last night's live stream where I went over the scenarios. That was the best article that I'd seen on the post-election period, the 78 days, and the various things that could happen in those days. And so here I am again talking Trump tonight as we get closer to the election. It seems more and more important to point out certain things. Let us start sharing an article. Well, before I share whatever I was going to share, let me say that I released another progressive short take today. This one was on the second wave of the COVID-19. So you may want to look up at my Facebook page and or my YouTube page for that particular video. They are highly visible, of course. And just yesterday, I released 2 other videos as well. The videos were Trump lied, 200,000 Americans died. And the other one was Bernie would have been way ahead by now. I have 2 more videos that are ready to come out. The next one is going to be on Tom Hartman's negligent homicide perspective. I may get a chance to post that a little later tonight. or certainly tomorrow. So let me get on to sharing the screen now and going on to the main topic of tonight, which is the 10 ways Trump is becoming a dictator. The article on which this is based was in Foreign Policy magazine, and the author, Stephen Walt, calls it the election edition of the 10 ways Trump is becoming a dictator. Steve Walt is a professor, I believe a political science professor at Harvard. And he has 10 ways. He said he's been a little surprised by Trump in that what he failed to anticipate was that Trump's authoritarian ambitions would get worse the longer he sat in the Oval Office, and that his ability to pursue them would increase once he had the chance to replace anyone with integrity and a genuine commitment to their oath to defend the Constitution with lackeys, opportunists, and power-hungry ideologues, which of course is what has happened. I think that's an accurate assessment of what's happened during the 4 years Trump has been in office. And it's why he's much more dangerous now than he was in 2016. Steve Walt says, as I've noted before, Trump now has every incentive to do whatever he can to remain in power, if only to keep himself and his family out of jail and to avoid losing the ill-gotten gains of a lifetime of legally questionable business deals, not to mention the millions of dollars worth of self-dealing he's indulged in as president, which of course was a fancy way to mention that, right? I've updated my original top 10 warning signs on 2 previous occasions, but with the elections roughly 2 months away, it seemed an appropriate moment to do one more assessment. Spoiler alert, if you cherish the core values of the U.S. Constitution, however imperfectly we have achieved them, and you want to live in a country where the rule of law still applies and the voice of the people can still be heard clearly, you have ample reason to be worried, very worried. Well, what I'd have to say about that is, I do want to live in a country where the rule of law still applies and the voice of the people can still be heard clearly, but there's a little problem with that in that I don't think we have that even now. We've already given that away, and we have to reclaim that. But of course, we do have ample reasons to be worried, okay, and very worried, because the election of Trump might make it even harder for us to reclaim that. So here's the list of 10 ways that Steve Walt sees. First, systematic efforts to intimidate the media. Now, that's been a central feature of his presidency from the beginning. His tweets about fake news and his none too veiled attempts to threaten the owners of the media outlets he dislikes, such as CNN or the Washington Post. As he reportedly admitted to Leslie Stahl at CBS, Trump has attacked the press quite deliberately. He said, quote, "Well, you know why I do it," unquote. She later said to PBS, quote, "I do it to discredit you all and demean you all, so when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you," unquote. Well, I think Trump has been partly successful at that. I say only partly, not because he hasn't been very successful in that part, but because even before Trump, the reporters in the mainstream had largely already discredited themselves anyway, so that the negative stories they wrote about him in the run-up to the election of 2016 and the negative stories they write about anyone is generally taken with a grain of salt by the public, because the public no longer trusts the working press because of decades of abuse of the public on the part of the mainstream press. To go on, such efforts continue to this day. In May, for example, Trump signed an executive order that could eventually allow the government to oversee political speech on the internet, a move that came the same week Twitter had marked two of his erroneous tweets with a fact-checking label. But that's not all. The administration has also increased prosecutions involving journalists' use of classified information, searched their electronic devices, and monitored reporters' movements. And Trump's re-election campaign has sued the New York Times, CNN, and other news organizations for libel. Trump's repeated descriptions of the press as, quote, the enemy of the people, unquote, may have inspired followers to threaten news organizations on their own, and encouraged the arrests and attacks on journalists covering recent demonstrations in several U.S. cities. As Chris Wallace of the normally pro-Trump network Fox News recently put it, quote, President Trump is engaged in the most direct, sustained assault on freedom of the press in our country. And by the way, as long as we're talking about that, we need to mention the attempted extradition of Julian Assange, but from the UK right now. If the U.S. is allowed to extradite him and he's forced to stand trial here, and of course he won't get a fair trial here because the court won't be a public court, it's going to be a quasi-military court. Attendance at the court is going to be restricted. The reporters will be restricted in their covering of the trial. And, of course, certain types of defense will not be allowed Assange because he's going to be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Okay, you know that, of course, that it's impermissible to defend charges under the Espionage Act by saying that what was revealed was true and that it was in the interests of the people of the United States to have the revelation. You can't use that as a justification to fight charges under the Espionage Act. So right there, right off the bat, there won't be a fair trial for Assange. We know that. Okay, if Assange is tried and is convicted just for publishing secrets, then that means freedom of the press is gone with respect to the freedom of the press to publish secrets that become available to it, even when these secrets involve violations of U.S. laws by the government. That is a real constraint when it comes to democracy. That's really undermining democracy. And Trump is doing all he can to make that happen right now. All he can. He, along with the British, they previously had the cooperation of the Swedes and the Ecuadorians. They've all been doing that. 2, building an official pro-Trump media network. Early reports that Trump or one of his sons was going to start his own media company proved unfounded. But as I noted in my earlier reassessments, the president hardly needs his own news company when he has Fox News almost entirely in his camp. When Fox anchor Sean Hannity is said to be a close personal advisor, and when the even more wackadoodle One American News Network is reliably in his corner. Trump can also count on radio host Rush Limbaugh, to whom he gave a Presidential Medal of Freedom last year. What a travesty, what a travesty. A Medal of Freedom for Rush Limbaugh. He should have gotten the Medal of Tyranny. He's been about that all these years. To echo whatever new falsehood the president chooses to tweet, such as telling his listeners the coronavirus was, quote, the common cold, folks, unquote, and just a left-wing conspiracy to bring Trump down. Who needs Pravda when you've got Limbaugh, says Steve Walt. Three, the third way, politicizing the civil service, the military, the National Guard, or the domestic security agencies. The president may be commander-in-chief and head of the executive branch, but soldiers and civil servants swear an oath to the Constitution, not an individual. Ignoring that principle, Trump has tried to get government officials to express their, quote, loyalty, unquote, to him personally, and led cabinet meetings where appointees sing his praises in cringeworthy fashion. He replaced Attorney General Jeff Sessions with William Barr after Sessions showed a certain degree of integrity, which was amazing that he did that, but he did that. And Barr's extreme commitment to the principle of executive authority and resulting willingness to protect the president and even to lie on his behalf make former Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's loyalty to his brother John and former Attorney General John F. Mitchell's fealty to former President Dick Nixon seem rather quaint. In any case, it's a pretty small step from believing in a president's total authority over the executive branch to the view that he should be beyond the rule of law entirely, which would be just fine with Trump. And recently, these efforts have taken an even more serious turn. Trump has been replacing experienced officials with unqualified loyalists, such as appointing former ambassador to Germany Richard Grenell as acting director of national intelligence, and pressuring the Navy to reverse a decision to reinstate the commander of the aircraft carrier, the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The use of tear gas and federal personnel to clear demonstrators from Lafayette Square in Washington that Trump could stage a photo op, and the presence of chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, and his entourage. A misjudgment for which Milley later apologized is yet another case where Trump tried to turn nonpartisan institutions into part of his posse. Should have said personal posse, of course. Finally, the recent campaign to curtail or remove independent inspectors general at the Departments of State, Defense, Health and Human Services, and Transportation, and in the intelligence services smacks either of political payback, e.g. in the case of the Inspector General who forwarded the whistleblower report alleging that Trump had attempted to get Ukraine to dig up dirt on former Vice President Joe Biden by withholding U.S. aid, or a desire to protect top officials from independent scrutiny. Either way, it's another sign that Trump thinks government agencies are working for him and not for the U.S. taxpayer. 4, using government surveillance against domestic political opponents. I don't know if Trump is using the FBI, CIA, or other surveillance capabilities to spy on the Biden campaign or to monitor other political opponents, but we do know that the federal government has conducted surveillance of people protesting the administration's immigration policies, and Trump has threatened to declare the loose and leaderless Antifa movement, a terrorist organization, which could allow domestic security agencies to conduct more far-reaching surveillance on anti-Trump protests. Trump and his allies are certainly not above using government institutions to advance the president's personal political fortunes, and sometimes they're not even coy about it. Thus Republican Senator Ron Johnson told a local radio station that his baseless Senate investigation into Hunter Biden's activities in the Ukraine would, quote, help Donald Trump win the re-election, unquote. Exactly what Senate investigations are not supposed to be for. They're supposed to be for oversight of the executive branch for the purpose of strengthening, repealing, or passing new legislation. 5. Using state power to reward corporate backers and punish opponents. At this point, it is hardly headline news to report the Trump administration is deeply corrupt and that Trump and his family have been using high office to enrich themselves in various ways. At times, these tangled relations are almost comical, as when the Trump Organization asked the Trump administration for a break on the lease payments it owes on the building containing the Trump International Hotel in Washington. Other examples are more serious, however. According to a recent Brookings Institution study, the administration's response to the deadly coronavirus pandemic has been marred by inadequate oversight and clear signs of corruption. Quote, there have been reports that 27 clients of Trump-connected lobbyists have received up to $10.5 billion of government coronavirus-related spending. That the beneficiaries have also included the multiple entities linked to the family of Jared Kushner and other Trump associates and political allies. Up to $273 million was awarded to more than 100 companies that are owned or operated by major donors to Trump's election efforts that are necessary by blanket ethics waivers have been applied to potential administration conflicts of interest. That many other transactions that merited further investigation have occurred, unquote, according to the study. Meanwhile, organizations that Trump regards as unfriendly run the risk of being singled out for harsh treatment. Just last week, Barr decided to speed up an antitrust effort against Google, a move said to be, quote, in keeping with Barr's willingness to override the recommendations of career lawyers in cases that are of keen interest to President Trump, who has accused Google of bias against him. Oh, the poor baby. 6, stacking the Supreme Court. The president's ability to stack the Supreme Court depends on whether openings occur and whether the Senate is compliant. Trump doesn't have to worry about the Senate, which allowed him to appoint 2 new justices during his first term. He hasn't gone any further, but only because he hasn't had another opportunity since the controversial appointment of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. In the meantime, Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are doing a fine job of packing the lower courts, including some candidates with decidedly dodgy qualifications. If you think this is just a matter of abortion rights or gun control, think again. If the 2020 election is a nail-biter, lower court decisions on potential electoral irregularities could matter a lot. Indeed, several recent decisions in Wisconsin, Texas, Florida, and Alabama have opened the door to precisely the type of voter suppression that would benefit Trump. As other democratically elected autocrats know full well, checks and balances and the rule of law are no obstacle once the judiciary has been transformed from watchdog to lapdog. Enforcing the law for only one side. One could devote a whole column to this warning sign alone, while railing against threats from immigrants, protesters, and the extremely dangerous, traitorous, and menacing yet sleepy Joe Biden. Trump has largely turned a blind eye to far more serious criminals. Although right-wing terrorist groups and white supremacists are responsible for far more U.S. deaths than left-wing protesters or foreign terrorist groups, Trump has repeatedly signaled his sympathy for the former in various ways. Most recently, he has defended right-wing vigilante Kyle Rittenhouse, who allegedly shot 2 people to death during an altercation in Kenosha, Wisconsin. At the same time, Trump is happy to give clemency to his own criminal associates, such as convicted felon Roger Stone, and Barr ordered the Justice Department to drop charges against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn who had already pleaded guilty to them, a highly unusual move that prompted 2,000 former Department of Justice employees to sign an open letter warning that Barr had once again, quote, assaulted the rule of law, unquote. Make no mistake, there are two legal systems in Trump's America. One is for the president and his cronies. The other is for suckers like you, the same as it is in other autocracies. Number 8, really rigging the system. When someone such as David Brooks of the New York Times writes a column telling you to prepare to participate in a massive campaign of civil disobedience following the November election, you know that we're in serious trouble. Now, that's a good observation. When David Brooks tells you to participate in that, yeah, we're in serious trouble. I mean, that guy doesn't resist a wet noodle. And here he is telling you to get in the street. And there's nothing subtle about it. Trump has made it abundantly clear that he will do everything in his power to rig the election in his favor. He has no choice. Unemployment is high. Evictions are increasing. Deficits are soaring. The trade deficits he promised to fix are still there. And his administration's bungled response to the pandemic that Trump kept denying will have killed roughly 200,000 Americans by election day. By the way, we can't fail to show right now that as of now, let me do a refresh on this page. As of now, according to the Worldometer site, we have reached as of today, 201,346, and the day is not quite over, total deaths in the United States. It is September 16th. We reached the 200,000 mark actually yesterday by September 15th. More than a month and a half before election time. Moreover, our deaths per million now, as of this moment, according to the Worldometer site, our deaths per million are at 608 now. And that means that we are only 5 behind the UK. We've come a long way to catch up to the UK, but we've come there increasingly rapidly, and we're only within 5 deaths per million. Now, today alone, we already went up from 604 deaths per million to 608 deaths per million, and the day is not over. So there's every chance that tomorrow we will either tie or exceed the UK in deaths per million of people living in the United States. A very dubious honor, which, neglecting the small nations, will lift us to number 9 in, well, actually, we're number 9 now, neglecting the very small nations. So it will lift us to number 8 in the world. And for the first time, by a long shot, we will be ahead of the UK in deaths per million. The UK has been holding it between 611 and 613 deaths per million, it seems like, for almost the last month. And we have been coming up from in the low 500s to reach this point where we're about to surpass them. Now, it may be a while till we surpass Ecuador, Brazil, and Chile, because they're moving even faster than we are at this time, as is Bolivia, as is Peru. But even though Spain has had a spike of late and is having plenty of deaths considering its size, it had 239 just yesterday. It has only 46 million people, so it's what, 1/6 of the size of the United States. So Spain had more deaths per capita yesterday than we had, or today, okay, than we had. We were at 1149, they were at 239, but if you multiply what they've had by 6, you can see they had more deaths per capita. So at least on this one day, they were moving faster than we, but that probably won't go on for too long. They're probably our next target to surpass in this grim contest of who will be the worst in the world when it comes to fatalities per million. Anyway, back to the Post, back to the article. We've already killed the 200,000 Americans. We're now looking at getting to 250,000 by Election Day. Even as many other countries have managed to turn the corner and move back closer to normal life. Now there's a record to run on. Even with the built-in advantages of the Electoral College, Trump is facing a humiliating, if much-deserved, defeat, as he does on the golf course. Therefore, Trump is all too willing to cheat. He has called for supporters to vote twice if they can. He has tried to defund or disrupt the U.S. Postal Service, making it less capable of handling a surge of mail-in ballots, while at the same time claiming falsely that mail-in voting, which he uses himself, is rife with fraud. He and his underlings have been reluctant to say publicly that he would leave office if defeated. Uh-oh. Number 9, fear-mongering. What do you do when you're trailing in the polls? You have no idea how to get people back to work. You can't get the pandemic under control. Simple. Try to scare people about something else. Just as Trump ran for office in 2016, offering wild-eyed and irresponsible claims about the Mexican rapists, Muslims, and other foreign dangers. This time around, I should have put quotes around the rapist insult, of course. This time around, he's working overtime to convince voters that the United States cities are in flames and the angry mobs of non-white people are heading for the suburbs to seize homes and destroy their entire way of life. When Trump's inaugural address in 2017 warned of, quote, American carnage, unquote, but we fail to realize that he was really telling us what he intended to accomplish as president. At the same time, he's trying to convince people that Biden is somehow both too tired to be president, he isn't, and at the same time a dangerous amalgam of Malcolm X, the Red Army faction, and the Zodiac Killer. It's a transparent and desperate ploy, especially given that crime rates are still at historically low levels, but Trump's lies have worked for him before. To be clear, violent protests are wrong, and the destruction of property should be condemned no matter who does it. Biden gets this, of course, and has condemned violent extremism of all kinds in no uncertain terms. Trump doesn't mind when his supporters threaten or engage in violence, and he hardly ever condemns them openly. Instead, his only hope is to sow as much division and hatred as he can between now and November 3rd, in the hope that that might lead enough frightened people to cast a vote on his behalf, or maybe to take to the streets if he loses. And that's what's really frightening. Number 10, demonizing the opposition. This warning sign is a classic authoritarian move, and it's closely related to number 9, as his attacks on the media illustrate. It's been a key part of Trump's playbook throughout his political career. In Trump's world, one cannot imagine legitimate differences between equally patriotic and responsible Americans. The sort of honest disagreements that democratic systems exist to accommodate and reconcile. You're either with him or you are evil, insane, crazy, nasty, a traitor, etc. Of course, as many have noted, the most revealing windows into Trump's own character are the accusations he routinely levels at others. As his political fortunes sink, this tendency is getting worse too. Case in point, his demagogic speech at Mount Rushmore on Independence Day, along with some standard 4th of July boilerplate about the Founding Fathers and the War of Independence. Trump used the occasion to lambaste angry mobs, quote unquote, defacing, quote, sacred memorials, unquote, accusing opponents of trying to, quote, unleash a wave of violent crime, unquote, representing, quote, totalitarianism, unquote, and, quote, far left fascism that demands absolute allegiance, unquote. His wild accusations had little or no basis in fact, and the speech made no attempt to bring the American people together in the face of the many challenges they are facing today. But when your best hope is to convince enough voters that that other side is even worse than you are, which would be saying something, then making up scary stories is what we have to expect. That is where we are today. After more than 3.5 years in office, Trump continues to exhibit all 10 of my warning signs of democratic collapse. On several of them, he's gotten worse over time. There's no reason whatsoever to believe that a re-election would suddenly instill in this congenitally dishonest and self-centered narcissist a new commitment to the core principles of U.S. democracy. On the contrary, it will only reinforce his belief that he can get away with just about anything. How about a third term, suckers? Maybe Ivanka Trump can run in 2028, and we'll rig that for her, too. Can you honestly think of any law or norm he wouldn't break if he thought it would be to his benefit and that he wouldn't get stopped? Which members of today's Republican Party would suddenly grow some vertebrae and try to stop him? I didn't used to be an alarmist, but when a president and his administration break some laws with impunity, there is no reason to believe they won't break bigger ones if they think they can get away with it. But heed well what this really means. At that point, every one of us, including those who might have voted for him, becomes vulnerable to whatever they want to do. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what is at stake come November. Stephen M. Walters, The Robert, and by Renee Belfer, Professor of International Relations at Harvard University. So that's who wrote that piece. I certainly agree with all 10 ways. They've all been employed by Trump. These are ways in which he's undermined the institution of the presidency, the institutions of Congress, the institutions of the courts. Of course, there are people who think that Joe Biden is going to be just as bad, or worse. I'm not certain that he would be. I wouldn't be surprised if he was not better. But we have a president who is terrible now. We have to hold him accountable. We cannot let presidents who have had poor performance get away with poor performance. We cannot let presidents who have been undermining our democratic system get away with undermining our democratic system. If we want to warn Biden of what can happen to him if he performs poorly, The best way to do that is a landslide against Donald Trump right now. That's what we should have done to Barack Obama in 2012. He performed poorly in his first term, very poorly. He blew a big majority in those first 2 years and spent most of his time passing an inadequate stimulus bill. That took hardly any time. And then the rest of his time passing a giveaway to the insurance companies, the Affordable Care Act, which left all kinds of lives on the table. I've written a post on elsewhere showing that there were probably 356,000 unnecessary fatalities between the years 2010 and 2016 because Obama failed to pass a Medicare for All bill in 2009 when he absolutely had the chance to do so. He failed us, he failed himself, but we did not punish him in 2012 because Romney was supposedly even worse, so we did not punish him. We have to punish office holders who don't perform well. That is the only way to make office holders afraid of us and to get them, therefore, to perform well. That is the only way to do that. We have to start to do that. Okay, let me proceed then. There are a couple other things I wanted to cover. First, there was an article that appeared in Common Dreams. I'll share that for you as well. It was about Mitch, who is, of course, still ahead in Kentucky. The reason why he's ahead is because the dreadful Democratic Party, led by Chuck Schumer, did everything they could to nominate a totally ineffectual candidate that Mitch is still beating, regardless of how terrible Mitch is. He's been denying relief to millions and millions of Americans, including millions in his own home state, who could sure use stimulus checks and unemployment relief in spades, and they're not getting it because of Mitch, and Mitch is still beating Amy McGrath in the polls. Anyway, his latest caper is that he vows to be the firewall against progress in the Senate as Democrats mull over eliminating the filibuster. It's by Lisa Newcomb, who I believe is a new staff writer for Common Dreams. I haven't seen her before. Common Dreams must be prospering. Hoping to allow for the passage of progressive legislation, advocacy groups renewed calls to end the filibuster this week as Republican lawmakers joined Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in warning against the idea. And Mitch says, quote, "This threat to permanently disfigure the Senate has been the latest growing drumbeat in the modern Democratic Party's war against our governing institutions. Anybody remember how Mitch McConnell got rid of the filibuster for judicial appointments so he could ram through all of these Trumpian appointments that couldn't possibly survive a filibuster if there was still one? Upset about Mitch's packing the courts? He did this by getting rid of the filibuster, didn't he? So that only a majority vote was necessary. That's how he did it, right? He's got a slim majority in the Senate, but it's enough to ram through all these terrible justices who are Trumpian figures, but he doesn't want us to get rid of the filibuster. So when and if we take over the Senate and the House and the presidency, we can ram through all kinds of bills to get rid of the damage done by Trump and the Republicans, and we're getting warned against this. Democratic lawmakers and advocacy groups have ramped up calls to abolish the filibuster, a tactic used by both parties to thwart a minority party opposition to legislation in the U.S. Senate. But mostly it's been used by Republicans historically and by Southern Democrats, people opposed to progress. That's what the filibuster is about. Going so far as to set up a, quote, war room, quote unquote, to, according to NBC News, quote, wage an all-out war on the Senate filibuster in bullish anticipation of sweeping the 2020 election and passing an ambitious progressive agenda, unquote. So there's people who want this and people who don't. I don't have to spend a lot of time on this, I don't think. Both Democratic and Republican lawmakers has used the filibuster to counter majority party legislative proposals, but in recent decades, Democrats have moved towards supporting its elimination. Of course, because Democrats have been getting crippled by this, and Republicans get rid of the filibuster or part of the filibuster whenever it's necessary to do what they want, right? Quote, there's nothing in the Constitution about a filibuster, former presidential candidate Andrew Yang said to Ezra Klein in an interview published at Fox last week. Quote, it is just some weird, arcane, esoteric Senate rule that took on a life of its own. And so if you're willing to put that rule above getting stuff done, then what are you doing? In a blog in 2009, I think I said something like, the filibuster is not worth the bones of a dead American who dies due to lack of insurance for failure to pass a Medicare for All bill, or words to that effect. I wrote that in a blog in 2009. So this palaver about getting rid of the filibuster has been going on intermittently for some very long time. Now, finally, it seems like the mainstream of the Democratic Party is ready to put the filibuster aside, when if they had done so in 2009, a $1.8 trillion stimulus bill that would have gotten rid of the recession in short order could have been passed, when a Medicare for All bill could have been passed, when great environmental bills and climate change bills could have been passed, when great education bills could have been passed, if we could have gotten rid of the filibuster in 2009. But of course, everybody was defending it then. Great progressives like Barbara Boxer, otherwise known as Bobby Soxer. Well, they all could have passed that, right? But no, they wanted to safeguard this tradition of the Senate that made it the greatest debating society in the world. What was it? What's that old saying? And Bernie Sanders says, President Obama is absolutely right. Now, until even 9 months ago, Bernie Sanders was not for getting rid of the filibuster. Now he says, President Obama is absolutely right. It is an outrage that modern-day poll taxes, gerrymandering, ID requirements, and other forms of voter suppression still exist today. If expanding the Voting Rights Act requires us to eliminate the filibuster, then that is what we must do. Just get rid of the filibuster first, Bernie. Don't wait for them to stymie you on expanding the Voting Rights Act. Get rid of the filibuster on January 3rd, 2021, when the Senate convenes. That's the time to get rid of it. Don't posture about it. Don't threaten over it. Don't make a big stink over it. Just don't pass the filibuster rule, allowing the filibuster. Allow majority rule to govern when you have the frickin' majority. Obama calls for elimination of the filibuster in order to pass voting rights legislation. Thanks. Too bad you didn't call for elimination of the filibuster when you were becoming the president in 2009. Maybe we would have gotten a lot more things done then, Barack. We know what's broken in this country, and we know how to fix it. And we didn't know in 2008, 2009, right? But widely popular policies are stuck, and Republican obstruction in the Senate is only getting worse. We won't make progress unless we face this head on. It's past time to get rid of the filibuster. Yeah, it's past time to get rid of the filibuster. It should have been done in the 1960s. In the 1960s, it should have been done. In August, presidential nominee Joe Biden said he is open to the idea, but stopped short of fully supporting it. Sure, then he would not have an excuse for not passing a legislation 88% of Democrats want, a Medicare for All bill. President Donald Trump has repeatedly called on Republicans to do away with the filibuster when Democrats have used it to block GOP-led legislation during his tenure, calling it, quote, stupid, unquote, and, quote, ridiculous, unquote. But unlike Democratic lawmakers who now wish to abolish the proceeding and had previously admired the use of the filibuster to block opposing party legislation, Trump has also flip-flopped on his position. Well, it's well for the article to point that out, but I would like to know if the Democratic lawmakers who had previously admired the use of the filibuster to block opposing party legislation can name one historical instance, or at least the latest historical instance, where Democratic lawmakers were successful in blocking a piece of legislation the Republicans wanted using the filibuster. Because I can't recall that happening. Maybe it happened once during the 1990s. I'm not even sure it happened as far back as the 1990s. It might not have happened. I mean, you might have to go back to the 1980s to find a use of the filibuster that blocked legislation Ronald Reagan wanted. And even then, I doubt you'll find one even then. I don't remember an instance then. I'm guessing when I say there was an instance then. I do remember that since Bill Clinton's administration, there has not been one time where Democrats have used the filibuster to block anything. I think I'm right about that. If someone thinks I'm wrong, find an instance. I mean, Democratic lawmakers have been standing by the filibuster now for decades, even though we've gotten absolutely nothing out of it, and the Republicans have gotten all sorts of nonsense out of using the filibuster. Whew. Still, progressive Democrats and advocates say the filibuster is outdated and needs to be retired. Yeah. Quote, the rhetoric alone simply won't get it all done, unquote. Christina Harvey, managing director for Stand Up America, said in a statement earlier this month, quote, it's time for action, and it's time for Biden and Schumer to pledge their support for abolishing the filibuster, unquote. I certainly endorse that position. Let's get them on record as quickly as possible and finally make the friggin' filibuster go. That would be excellent if we could make it go. Okay, one more for you. Getting back to Trump. This is a very brilliant piece by William Rivers Pitts from Truth Out, and it's called Every Trump Lie is a Confession, published on September 14th. Donald Trump played host to what can only be described as a deliberate COVID super spreader event in Nevada on Sunday. It is journalistically perilous to bandy words like, quote, a deliberate, unquote, and, quote, super spreader, unquote. but I watched every galling second of his rally at the Extreme manufacturing plant in Henderson, Nevada, and those words deserve to share the same space as, quote, water, unquote, and, quote, wet, unquote, in the context of what went down in the desert yesterday. 1,000 of Trump's most avid devotees came from miles around to stuff themselves into an enclosed indoor space where they stood packed like cattle in a high-density field, maskless almost to a person, screaming and sweating all over each other in an orgiastic celebration of the death of reason. Damn, that guy's a good writer, isn't he? I picture a COVID-19 virion, I guess that's the singular for virus particle, okay, a virion, its crowns bristling red, feet up and reclined on its barca lounger after a hard day at work killing people. Visualize this, folks. Envision this, looking serenely over that mob of reckless idolaters before leaning to a virion friend and saying, quote, hold my beer, unquote. We will be hearing about the medical consequences from Sunday evening's event before the calendar turns, if the pattern holds, which it has with nearly unfailing consistency since this dismal year began. Trump's speech was an abomination of lies, distortions, exhortations, and puling complaints. In other words, it was every speech he has given at every rally since he came down the golden escalator 5 years ago. It was a triumph of the mundane, proof itself of the banality of evil, so boring after endless repetition that none of the networks, not even C-SPAN, bothered to broadcast it. I had to work to find the thing. As I let the bilge tide of Trump's gibberish wash over me, however, I found myself encased in a rare moment of clarity. It is difficult to think straight when the president is ruining your country in real time, at the top of his voice and right in your face. That, of course, is the entire point of the exercise, quote, for those who have been beaten down by the Trumpian disaster porn, unquote, writes Timothy Miller for the Bulwark. Quote, rallies such as this don't really make a mark any longer, unquote. As I watched this latest one, though, Trump seemed to me to be receding down a long hallway. God, I hope William Rivers Pitt is right about this. I could hear him fine, but the mind-scrambling impact of his weaponized nonsense faded, and I found myself, for the first time in months, actually listening to what he was saying. It came to me suddenly, in a burst of inner light. Every accusation this man makes, every lie he tells, very nearly every word he speaks, is a public confession of his own corruption and venality. It is far beyond the cold Karl Rove tactic of using your opponent's best strength against them. With Trump, it is a bending of the light itself, of reality, a transference of personal responsibility, so comprehensive as to be virtually seamless. Quote, whether it's in North Carolina, whether it's in Michigan, whether it's in other states where they're going to be sending out 80 million ballots, unquote, said Trump yesterday in Nevada, and quote again, and it's Democrats. They're trying to rig this election at every single place in the last year and a half. Go modern day, forget about ellipse, tiny amounts, a congressional race in New York, a small number of votes. If you go to New Jersey, if you go to Virginia, if you go to Pennsylvania, if you go to California, look at some of these races. Every one of these races was a fraud, missing ballots. And I don't mean like 1%. I mean like 20%, 25%. They're trying to rig the election, unquote, says the man who is actively attempting to dismantle the United States Postal Service and the practice of mail-in voting itself, because he believes the only way he can win the election at this point is to steal it. That was a confession, says Pitt. And quote again, Sleepy Joe Biden, who surrendered. You know where he is now. He's in his damn basement again, unquote, said Trump yesterday. Quote, no, he's in his basement, unquote, says the man who himself surrendered utterly to COVID-19, because doing otherwise required hard work and a dollop of humility, neither of which this restaurant would recognize if they pissed in his face. He surrendered to that COVID-baked crowd before him, to his belligerent base, because they believed him when he called the pandemic a, quote, hoax, unquote, all those weeks ago. Now he must maintain that deadly illusion in order to maintain their loyalty. Another confession, quote, Biden and his party of liberal hypocrites want to lock law-abiding Americans in their homes, which is what they're doing, unquote, said Trump, and quote, and they want to keep them out of church, unquote, says the most irreligious president in U.S. history, whose use of the military and federal law enforcement against civilians, including snatching protesters off the street and stuffing them into unmarked vans, very nearly toppled the country into a constitutional crisis. Another confession. Quote, how about your gas prices, asked Trump. Quote again, that's not too bad, right? You didn't think you'd ever see those prices, those under $2 prices, did you? Thank you, President Trump. I appreciate it, sir, unquote, says the man whose lethal bungling of the pandemic brought about an economic tailspin that will take years to recover from. Want to know why gasoline is so cheap? Because the price of petroleum happily collapsed to literally less than zero after the pandemic locked down travel all around the world. This, I suppose, was his confession to being incomprehensibly oblivious to and uninterested in the ocean of suffering he has unleashed. It's all one long stream of consciousness confession now. Hope I'm not the only one taking notes, unquote. And that is the end of a memorable rant from William Rivers Pitt about Trump's long confession of his misdeeds and his lies and his corrupt character. On that note, I'm going to turn to your comments. And so here we are. Alice Little says, oh my God, Caputo going completely insane, saying there will be a new civil war when Trump loses November 3rd. These people are living on lies with no evidence, and they ignore evidence. I don't understand. They reject the rule of law. What do they stand for then? Alice, they stand for fascism. They stand for dictatorship. They stand for the rule of the fascist leader. Il Duce, der Fuhrer. That's what they stand for. But Trump is more similar to Il Duce than der Fuhrer. You can see it in the expression on his face. He's nowhere near as smart as Il Duce, however, but that's another thing. However, they're saying there will be a new civil war when Trump loses November 3rd. Yes, because they intend to try to start one. So they're not completely insane because they intend to try to start one. The question is, will their insane followers follow them? Or will they lose their nerve? What will the military do? What will Milley do? Will he defend the Constitution? Will he conform to his oath when it's obvious who's trying to overturn the rule of law and the Constitution? Alice Little says, it is un-American for him to be attacking our news sources. Who do we trust when he sets up confusion? Fox is the only news I know that's 100% false. I wouldn't say Fox is 100% false. I would say MSNBC is often false. I would say Fox is probably false more of the time. I would say CNN is false more of the time. But they're all false. They're all misleading. They're all lying. That's why the prestige of the press, the mainstream press, is so low right now. How many times did CNN lie about Medicare for all? How many times did they lie about Bernie Sanders and what he wanted to do? How many times did they lie about socialism? How many times did they just ignore important events that Bernie Sanders was doing? Lying by omission. What about lies of omission? They're expert at lies of omissions. All the mainstream networks. The best thing that could happen to the United States after Trump, the best thing a new administration could do is to lift the FCC licenses of the mainstream news networks and open the licenses up to bid. I admit that would be very difficult and would require establishing a commission of utterly honest people to choose the best candidates for mainstream networks. But really, these three mainstream networks, the mainstream cable networks, have done us a disservice for years. All the mainstream press has done us a disservice for years. The alternative press, at least on the progressive side, is doing a much better job of covering stories. Who in the mainstream is covering the Assange trial now? The most important freedom of the press trial since the Pentagon Papers. In the lifetimes of relatively young people who weren't alive in 1973. For them, it's the most important trial of their lifetimes. And the press isn't even covering it as well as the Convo couch. Not even as well as the Convo couch. That's what's amazing about this. I mean, the judge is carrying out a kangaroo court there. And it's not getting into the mainstream press. Assange might be a wingnut. It doesn't matter. Assange is a publisher. It doesn't matter how wingy or how nutty he is. He's a publisher. And he's being prosecuted under the Espionage Act. If he can be prosecuted under the Espionage Act, the New York Times, who published his stuff, can be prosecuted under the same act. Kay says Assange has already paid enough for telling the truth. Alice says he's wrecked his life from the looks of it. No, he has not wrecked his life. His life was wrecked by the United States government and by those he exposed. He is not to blame for that wrecking of his life. He exercised freedom of the press. That's all he did. You don't want to scapegoat the victims. You want to scapegoat the persecutors. Jesus. No, he hasn't. The U.S. has wrecked his life. Yes, Kay. Yes, Kay. The U.S., the U.K., Sweden, even Australia in their zeal to serve their U.S. masters, the leaders of Australia have failed to protect their own citizen. It's a scandal. Dolores says freedom of the press is on trial. Exactly, Dolores. Alice says, I guess I emailed him after the election and asked why he made such a big deal of the emails. The ones I've read seem like everyday correspondence. And what could be more secure than a former president's server? I was never worried about her emails. I had a company try and get me with emails once, and I appealed, so they were forced to read every damn one and see I'm not a spy. I said bad things about Trump, too. I just laughed out loud at him. He was heavily responsible. Look, the story on the hacking of the email server was that John Podesta, who had access to that server, used the word password. That was his password on that server. And some hacker tried the word password because they knew that lazy people who were ignorant of IT stuff would occasionally use the word password as their password. So moron Podesta used that, and the hackers got into her emails. What could be more secure than a former president's server? It wasn't about the security of the server. It was about the idiocy of the people using it in developing passwords for themselves. They shouldn't have been allowed to do that. Passwords should have been assigned to them. I have passwords for my email that was originally assigned to me by Comcast. It's a nonsense password. A nonsense password. Very, very hard to hack. It doesn't mean anything. It's total nonsense. I memorized the password that first day, and I figured this will be a good password because it's nonsense. There's no hint at all of me in this particular password. Nothing could be inferred from my life or my background or anything else from this password. I've used this password now since what? I think it's 1998, when it wasn't even Comcast, when it was the Home Network or whatever the hell they were. Okay, before then, nobody's ever cracked that password. Nobody ever will. Podesta uses the word password. It's password. I mean, what a moron. He should be kicked out of politics for that. Kay says, I disagree, Alice. Alice says, Trump could be working directly from Hitler's playbook. Yeah, it was on his nightstand. I love how my being anti-fascist. Antifa makes me a terrorist. In my opinion, if you're not anti-fascist, you're pro-fascist. Profa. No, not in my country. Right, Alice. Right, Alice. Antifa. We've all got to be anti-fascist. If you're not anti-fascist, you're not a Democrat. I'm not talking about a big D Democrat. I mean, you're not a believer in democracy if you're not an Antifa. Kay says, hi, Evelina Pont, glad to see you. Alice says, I think most people disagreed with me. That's why Trump is president. The emails stopped the election dead in its tracks. People probably figured that if a presidential candidate was dumb enough to allow one of her advisors to use the word password for her server, she deserved to be defeated. But that's not why she was defeated. She was defeated because she wouldn't campaign on Medicare for all against the TPP and the other trade treaties and for an aggressive program on climate change. That's why she was defeated. She was defeated because her arrogance was too great and her stupidity was too great, and because she didn't want to give people what they wanted. And Biden is about to make the same mistake because Democrats never honestly examined why they were defeated in 2016. They used the email excuse. They used the Russian hacking excuse. That's not why they lost. They lost because of policy. Why did Trump win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania? Why? Because of the TPP. Because no Medicare for all. Because of NAFTA and the Clintons' association with NAFTA and all the jobs that were lost in those states. Alice says, it's so funny to see the self-proclaimed titan of industry dealing with these geniuses in the big leagues. He is, quote, so, unquote, out of his depth. It's amusing to watch, but terrifying to live under his rule. It is. It is absolutely terrifying. And now, it took him 4 years, but now the fascism is really on our doorstep. And we need to see that it doesn't come here. We can still stop it. When we stop it, everything's not going to be great again. We'll still have inverted totalitarianism, as Sheldon Wallen called it, because Biden will practice inverted totalitarianism. But at least it isn't fascism. At least the secret police won't be coming to your door. Kay says, most people were sick and tired of the Clintons. That's why so many just stayed home. And I agree. Many stayed home. There were some, Kay, voted for the Green Party, but not as much as, the Democrats like to contend. I don't think the Green Party and Jill Stein cost them that election. She got too few votes. Okay. Steve Gonzo said, we're never going to vote for her regardless of the emails. We lived it on the ground. The emails just confirmed what we were experiencing. Alice Little said, I did not want to vote for Clinton. I wanted to write in Bernie, but I didn't because the stakes were too high. Well, they were high in different states. Where you live, of course, that stake went for Trump. And it was pretty red. And I don't think that Clinton had a chance of getting Texas. So it would have been perfectly all right to write in Bernie. It wouldn't have hurt Clinton at that point. Okay. In Virginia, it might have hurt Clinton because the race was tighter here in 2016 than it's going to be this year. In this year, I think the Democrats have a lock on this state because the suburbanization of the Democratic Party has had 4 more years to operate here, and the Democratic Party is much stronger here now than it was in 2016. There's no way Trump is going to win here in this state. It's already gone for him. It's not even a purple state anymore. We live in a blue state now. It's a conservative blue state. It's a right-wing blue state. It's a centrist blue state, but it is a blue state. Evelina says, I can't say I'd be happier if the war crimes had been kept secret. I would be unhappier if the war crimes had been kept secret. Kay says, I held my nose and voted for her. Now I'm able to do it again with Biden to just rid this country of Rump, the fascist. Shake my head. Al says, DNC is corrupt as the RNC. I like to think they have a conscience, or at least their platform includes one. Nope. I don't think they have much conscience, but I will say they have more conscience than the Republicans, who've shown themselves absolutely without any sort of vertebrae. Alice said, Trump had a cow, and they said today there would not be a vaccine before January. Then I heard there is a vaccine and it's being rolled out now. Well, I think you might be talking about the Russian vaccine being rolled out now. That hasn't fully gone through phase 3 trials. By all accounts, it's a dangerous vaccine. If they roll it out here, people are going to die. When they said that today there would not be a vaccine before January, I think the people who were saying that were probably saying there would not be a vaccine that had been proven safe before January. And I don't think they're going to roll it out to everybody in January. They need more time. Kay says, no, there is none yet. Made me wonder just now if there are scammers out there selling a cure. The Russians, they are shipping some of their not fully tested vaccine. Supposedly, I've heard that Venezuela has bought millions of doses, put in an order for millions of doses anyway, and will get those doses over some relatively short period of time from the Russians. Evelina says CDC said a vaccine won't be widely available until mid-2021. Fauci has said life might not get back to normal until the end of 2021. Kay says could very well be scammers or bots. Alice says thanks, Evelina. That sounds more like what is normal regarding protocols for vaccine. I heard Trump is hanging on the idea he can scream, quote, I made the cure, unquote. And Steve says, sorry, Joe, but they won't vote for JB either. Only 3% of hashtag Big Us have even bothered to donate to his campaign. I haven't bothered to donate for his campaign. I don't think Joe Biden has a funding problem. I mean, he sold out to all the Wall Streeters. Why the hell should I give him $1? I mean, I'm not going to give him $1. He doesn't need my money. He needs my vote. If he wants to get my vote, he's going to have to come out with Medicare for all. He's going to have to say free college. He's going to have to say Green New Deal. Alice Little says, I thought Spain was through the pandemic. No, it flared up again. It flared up again in the Madrid area. And right now, for the moment, it's out of control there. Yes, they were through the pandemic. They really got it down to low numbers. Now they've got a big problem. Alice Little says, is Big Us corporations or peeps? I think it's peeps. And Kay says, pandemic is not over anywhere that I know of. Yeah, it's over in places like Taiwan. Of course, if they relax, if they're not fully alert to any possible outbreak or new case, it can come back again because it hasn't died out. Okay, so it's always possible that people coming into the country can carry it. But they haven't had a local case in Taiwan now in, I forget what I read just the other day, 3 months or something like that. Haven't had a local case. Fatalities in Taiwan are 0.3 of a person per million. There are 24 million people in Taiwan. So 24 times 0.3, I mean, what's that? That means they've had about 8 fatalities out of 24 million in Taiwan. Amazing, right? Evelina says, there was something like a second wave as in many parts of the world, according to the OMS. There's a second wave in the United States, in New England, and the Mid-Atlantic states. It's already started. I released a video on it today, Evelina. Go to my Facebook page, watch the video. I give you the statistics on it. It's definitely a second wave if you look at the curves. I share the graphics. I share the curves. You can see the second wave. It started. Where it started in the first place, in New England and the Mid-Atlantic. It's back in those states. Cuomo better do a much better job this time. Alice Little said, so funny. Republican Party platform. TBD. Yeah. Steve Gonzo says, Hashtag Big Us is ex-burners, BLM, lefties, Antifa, laugh out loud, etc. So it peeps. Alice says, thanks. Evelina says, no second wave in the U.S. because hasn't gotten over the first one yet. Alas. No, there is a second wave. Look at the graphs. There's a second wave. You can see the wave. You can see it graphically. Alice says, I'm looking forward to seeing Republican faces when they realize they've underestimated our need to scorch the earth of their present. Boy, I wish that were true. I wish that were true. Because we really need, if there's something the United States really needs bad, it's the destruction of that party, to be followed by the Democratic Party splitting into two parties. That's what we need. So we can have a working class party back. Kay says, I hope we can, Alice. Alice says, Don the Con, yeah, Lion Don, I like to call him. Don the Con is interested in one thing, being the king of the world. The King Khan of the world. Maybe he's already the King Khan of the world. Alice says, Biden is not a dictator. He does believe in justice and the rule of law from his actions. I'm not afraid of him as I am Trump. He's just dumb enough to get us all killed. I sort of agree, on Biden. He does believe in justice as an abstraction. He believes in the rule of law in the sense that he believes in following the procedures. But, and there's a big but here, there is no indication that he believes in the same law for people of different classes in the population. There's no indication he believes in the same law for you and me as is applied to rich people. There's no reason to believe that he believes in the same law for the Clintons as for you and me. No reason to believe in that, I don't think. I think he believes in justice. He believes in the rule of law as an abstraction. But I wouldn't give two figs for his ability to apply that abstraction in an even-handed way. I don't think his background suggests that. His anti-black policies throughout his life do not suggest that element of fairness that the law needs, that justice needs. Justice, legal justice, is not quite the same as fairness. But the more closely it approaches fairness, the more just it is, the more it approaches the ideal of justice. Evelina says, that's optimistic. Some reputable people believe, regardless of who wins, there will be an increase in right-wing acts of violence. Yes, I think so too. But I think if Biden wins, there will be fewer increases in right-wing acts of violence. Because I think instead of encouraging them, that Biden will repress them. I think he will do that. Kay says, I agree with Joe. We haven't had any that have helped any of us. Deborah Wilson says, why on earth do you think this puke they're giving us is any better? Because he's not a fascist. Because he's not a fascist, Deborah. Why do we fight the fascists? We don't fight fascists because we think we're going to win. We fight fascists because they're fascists. Alice says, because children won't be locked in cages. Well, to some extent, the practice of locking people in cages to some degree began under the Obama administration. Trump accentuated it and made it worse and separated the parents from the children. Yes, he did that. But the setup, the structural setup was a product of the Obama administration. Evelina says, I agree, Dr. Joe. They have to feel afraid. I think they're pragmatic enough to give in for certain demands if it is convenient. Al Siddle says, Mitch's wife has to stay in power. She is a linchpin. Her family in China is set to ship drugs, arms, and humans in a transnational mafia operation. Mitch McConnell's wife is Elaine Chao, I know, our director of transportation. She is critical in keeping the trade routes open and unhampered by law enforcement. This is all cited, sourced in the book Hiding in Plain Sight by Sarah Kendzior. Yes, I agree. Elaine Chao is who you say she is. So his wife has to stay in power. Maybe she'll find a place in the Biden administration. We have to wait and see. Maybe she'll turn out to be the trade representative. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past Biden to appoint her to something important. But Mitch doesn't have to stay in power. He doesn't have to stay in power. Alice says one of their methods for laundering money is through Trump Towers. They're like dormitories for Russian spies. They pay their leases in cash, and that cleans a good million or so a month. Kendzior checked into the owners, methods of payment, all the public information. We don't have time to come through. Thank you, Alice, for that reference. Evelina says, how odd that these top Republicans are all married to ethnically different from them women. I'm also thinking of Bush Jr. married to a Mexican American, as well as Trump, who has married former Soviet bloc women. Mitchell is the other example, like you say. And Bernie Sanders, who is he married to? He's just married to a nice American, the lady of Irish extraction. Mitch McConnell won't let anything get close to that point now. Avril says, better late than never. Hi, all. Hugs. Hi, Avril. Great to see you. Great to see you, Carmen. Alice says, reading the phone book will definitely not get it done. Alice, interesting. I see where he covers his lies with edicts, chump. It is so difficult to watch his events. I know. It is difficult to hear him, isn't it? Can hardly stand him. Kay says, I can't watch him at all, Alice. Evelina says, I can't either. Avril says, DT supporters are addicted to outrage, and DT gives them supply as they give him narcissistic supply in return. Yeah, that's a description of the relationship. Carmen says, me neither. Evelina says, it's hard to watch Biden and or Harris as well. It's hard to watch Harris. She's so cloying in the way she speaks. My God, it's so false all the time. Does she ever have an authentic word to say? It's all Madison Avenue-ized. Is it true that Donald Trump makes his rally attendants sign COVID immunity statements? Probably. Carmen says, vitriol. And Alice says, bunker done. And Kay says, at least Biden now can get a speech out without losing his place in the middle. Must have found some meds that work for him. Evelina says, basement Biden. Evelina says, yep. Alice says, brain dead old white men. Oh, brain dead old white men. Sorry, I scrolled this too fast. And oh, God. Evelina says, Bernie is still sharp. Yes, Bernie is still sharp. He is very sharp. Avril says, Evelina Pont, Beanie Bird. Bonnie and I are most likely going to vote for Bernie. We get to do write-in votes here in Virginia. We can write in Bernie Sanders, and we're going to write in Bernie Sanders because we want to vote our conscience. And it looks like the race here in Virginia is already tied up, so we're going to be able to vote our conscience. There is no Green Party here. Howie Hawkins never got on the ballot. And Deborah says, you were fantastic tonight, my friend. I don't know who you're referring to, but because I am not like Donald Trump, I will not automatically assume it was me. Carmen says, Bonnie says, she'll take it. Carmen says, asterisk Bernie correction. Avromano says, Ice Cube knows MMT. Have you guys seen his comment? I have seen his comment, and I have seen the photo of the deficit myth exhibited very prominently. I wouldn't say he knows MMT, but it's a fair bet that he's read the deficit myth and that he's internalized some of it, at least, and that he's a pretty intelligent guy, Ice Cube is, because he spit it back pretty well. He did. He did. And he sees the significance of it. He sees the significance of it. It's great to have him aboard. So Kay said, yes, I did, Avro. Are the Democrats starting the Russia gating again? Yeah, I heard so. Anything but admit they did something wrong. But you know where this all started? I think it really started back with the Clinton administration. When the Clinton administration lost their health care reform bill back in 1994, they refused to attribute their loss to their advocating for a bill that was so complicated that no one could understand it. So it was a sitting duck for the advertisers from the health insurance industry and the healthcare industry. Well, you know, the Harry and Louise campaign. The Harry and Louise campaign was so successful because Hillary Clinton and Ira Magaziner put together this horribly complicated bill that people could not understand. Anyway, they were sitting ducks for the ad campaign. The Republicans beat them on that bill. But the Clintons never took responsibility for the loss. They never took responsibility for creating that very complex bill instead of a much more simple Medicare for all bill they might have written. So anyway, when the Obama administration rolled around in 2009, the Obama administration brought in all these old Clintonites, you know, Rahm and his friends. They all came aboard through the transition team because Podesta was a key to the Obama transition team, if you recall. So when they came aboard, they were talking about what their strategy was going to be for healthcare reform. Okay, and the lesson they learned from the Clinton failure was not that the bill was a stupid, lousy bill, rather than a simple and straightforward Medicare for all bill, but a piece of wonky nonsense. They didn't learn that lesson. The lesson that they learned was that the administration gave a bill to Congress try to impose it on the Congress. That was the lesson they learned. They thought that's why the bill failed. So what Obama concluded he was going to do instead was to let the bill be written in Congress by the lobbyists and Max Baucus and run through the committee system, okay, in Congress. And he felt certain if he left Congress alone to craft a bill, he would be able to influence it in relatively small and unobtrusive ways all the way along the line. And the bill would get through Congress. And that's how the ACA shit show came to be. Okay? The shit show that cost 356,000 lives between 2010 and 2016. And if you want to see the article that documents that, it's on my website at josephmfirestone.com. Just look through the blogs there, and you can see my estimation of the 356,000 fatalities left on the table by the Affordable Care Act. And that's before Donald Trump got his hands on the Affordable Care Act in 2017. There, of course, have been even more fatalities per year since that time. Alice says, interesting idea, opening the networks to new licenses. I get my news from NHK Japan and Deutsche News, sometimes the BBC, but it's as bad as CNN. Who is covering Assange? I do need to watch that. Well, Assange is being covered by places like the Useful Idiots, which is a live stream, okay, or a video run by Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper. They just covered the Assange trial tonight. And by the Convo Couch, who's covering the Assange trial, okay, on a daily basis. Who are the Congo Couch? Pasta Jardula and Fiorella and Johnny Tsunami. And they get a direct line to Taylor Hudak, who is over there in London doing an excellent reportorial job on what is happening at the Assange trial.
Day by day.
So the Convo Couch is covering it on YouTube every day through Taylor Hudak, who is a very impressive young reporter, kind of giving you the facts, man. The facts. Answering questions with no hackneyed words, no cliches, just getting questions and giving answers, her best judgments, her best opinions, what she's been able to find out. Evelina says, yeah, yawn. And Avro says, mainstream news is ex-CIA operated, so I hear. Therefore, you get unrelenting propaganda. Yeah, they have hired a lot of ex-CIA people, like Anderson Cooper. Steve Gonzo says, let the blue light special shine the light on me. Let the vote blue, no matter who, light special shine its ever-loving light on me. That's Steve Gonzo. When you get up in the morning, when that big bell ring, you go and march to the table, see the same damn thing. Knife and fork are on the table, there's nothing in my pan. And if you say anything about it, having trouble with the man. That's the midnight special, isn't it?
Yeah,
let the midnight special shine its light on me.
Don't sing it.
That takes me back to the 1950s. Lead Belly. Evelina Pond says, independent media and RT, I believe. Yeah, RT is covering it too. Yes, RT is. I mean, probably Afshin Rattansi is covering it, isn't he? Alice says, hey, I love Eric Snowden. I'm only going by my gut with Assange. Well, That's not the point. I mean, the point is you don't have to like Assange. It's not about liking Assange.
It's about his treatment.
Okay, it's about knowing that he's a publisher, and they want to prosecute a publisher for publishing under the Espionage Act. That's a violation of the Constitution.
And he's not a citizen here.
It's a violation of the Constitution. And the only reason why it isn't plainly apparent at this point that it would be judged a violation of the Constitution is because of this Supreme Court that's rigged with Republican appointees. If this were a 5-4 court in favor of the Democrats, there's no way Assange would get convicted. Because this is plainly an unacceptable constraint on freedom of the press. It's been established since colonial times. You can't prosecute publishers. You can't prosecute people who are reporters.
Isn't it going to affect people across the world?
Yeah, it's going to affect people across the world. It's going to affect them in this way. The U.S. establishes a precedent that they can prosecute a foreign journalist exercising freedoms of the press. When is the next time when some foreign country arrests an American journalist for reporting on violations of freedom in that country and says, look, you did it with Assange, so why can't we do it with this New York Times reporter? Why not? How can you say to us it was okay for you to do it to Assange, but it's not okay for us to do it to whoever from the New York Times? What the United States is claiming is its right to reach into other nations and get a publisher that it doesn't like and prosecute that publisher under the Espionage Act. I mean, Alice, that is a step too far. We can't allow that to happen and still have a democracy. It just can't be allowed to happen. That enough is reason enough to get into the streets and stay there until the Espionage Act is absolutely repealed and thrown in the trash can of history. Kay says, it's too bad that online news can't get a real network going, kind of like free speech TV. Yeah, we would have to, well, maybe it could be done at minds.com, or maybe it could be done, okay, at Rockfin. I don't know, maybe. Alice says, I do know that about Podesta. I did not think that was the beginning, okay, and the end of it. Well, that's how they got in. That's how they got in. That's how they got all the emails that were released to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks then published them. Chelsea was instrumental too. No, that was a separate thing that WikiLeaks published. Yeah, that didn't come from Hillary's servers. We're talking about two different sets of leaks that ended up, okay, at WikiLeaks. Hashtag leak, not a hack. Yeah. Avril says, my password is fart knocker. Thank you, Avril, for that information. Too much information. Nancy Gossett Blackmore says, thanks for tonight, Dr. Joe. Wish more people would start paying attention to what's happening in this country. You are always so spot on. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate it. Al says, I stand corrected. I had no idea that was the password for that account. Yes, you are correct. That was a seriously old school error. Laugh out loud. Don't tell us your password. I hear you on your password. Mine is just letters. I like the hidden sequence. He should be fired for that password noise. He should never be allowed in government again. He should never get a security clearance again. I mean, the man was crazy. He might as well have written in his mother's name as his password.
When you have a password with 30 or 40 letters and numbers, drives you crazy every time you have to use it.
That's true. Every time I have to use it, yeah. I don't have a password with so many letters and numbers. I think mine is with 26. I have one password, but that's not the email password.
Okay.
That's the password for our private at-home network. We never want people in this network.
Yeah.
So we have a 26-character password. Let's see him crack that. Avril says, World War II soldiers were Antifa. Yes! The start of the Antifa movement. No, actually, the start of the Antifa movement was in Europe in the 1930s. Maybe it was in the 1920s. Alice says, yes, Texas. Avril says, Biden is blue MAGA. Alice says, that's exactly what I sent back to him. You don't need my money. If you can't get it from your owners, then maybe you're not the right president. Avril says, if Trump-Thinskin claims he's made the vaccine possible, I hope people remind him other countries have COVID under control without having a vaccine, while he is letting hundreds of thousands die. Don't worry, Avril. I'll remind him at least once a week.
How do they feel about people being shamed into how they're going to vote and why they didn't answer something for donations the day before?
How does who feel?
Anybody.
How does anybody feel about the Democrats shaming people to try to get votes and doing what else?
Pelosi's very good at that.
Okay, and also trying to guilt us into giving them donations.
Yeah.
These trillionaires, like Nancy Pelosi,
he has her own,
are trying to guilt us, okay, into giving them $5 or $10.
And she's got her own plan.
And she's worth hundreds of millions. And Evelina points out, okay, that Madrid is governed by the PP right now, the right-wing party. Yeah. And Alice says, my friends in the Philippines are extremely vigilant. They're having online classes right now. They, quote, unquote, love Duterte because he says if people are caught out violating social distancing, shoot them. When I asked if they thought that was scary, they said, quote, it has to be this way. These are high school kids, my STEM kids online. So Duterte is taking the virus seriously. Maybe we ought to believe the figures from the Philippines, though he's likely to distort the figures anyway, I suppose. I mean, he'll lie through his teeth, right? So their figures on fatalities are not to be trusted, are they? And Evelina says, miss that progressive short take today. Thanks, Dr. Joe. And Kay says, a movement for a People's Party. MPP. Avril says, good live streams today. Avril says, good short takes today. Thank you, Avril. And Alice Little says, Biden's Ray-Bans say it all. It's a prestige brand. Yeah, we haven't been able to afford the Ray-Bans for a long, long time. Those are those sunglasses that you like.
Oh, yeah.
The ones that turn. Yeah, you always wanted them. Then they got too expensive for us to buy.
Yeah.
So Biden's got some. Yeah, he wears them all the time. They're his aviator glasses.
Oh,
He's trying to pretend he's an aviator. Avril says, good short takes today. I saw the Hulk come out. Yeah, the Hulk was out a lot today. Avril said, famous quote by Chris Hedges. Right. It did not, Alice said, it did not start under Obama. Alice said, I had that argument with peeps in GB. I guess that's Great Britain. But the setup was made when Obama was no longer holding any power. Remember, they would not even let him select the SCOTUS. I remember they would not let him select a SCOTUS. Oh, you mean the setup of 5-4? Yeah, the setup of 5-4, that was due to the fact that he wasn't able to select the fifth person. That's absolutely true. But the setup of the system of holding people in the way they're being held, that was set up under Obama, under his Department of Homeland Security. It was set up under ICE when he was the president. Kay says Obama was the deporter in chief. Alice says chaos will be evident. Biden is as much a part of this as Trump, just less evil. Well, I think Biden is not an ideological fascist, and he's not going to act like one. Okay, he may do legislation which, okay, is racist, but he won't think of it, okay, as racist. He won't be trying to do something racist. Avril says, since the cages where Obama's doing, I'm surprised Donald Trump isn't raging against them like he does everything else concerning Obama. I guess he liked the cages idea because before they were Obama's idea, they were Hitler's idea. So that's why he liked it. Alice Little says, I don't think the cages were Obama's doing. I think they were part of the Republicans taking over. They were determined to set up those for-profit prisons to make it appear it was not their doing. I think the for-profit prisons were set up under Obama. I think the for-profit prisons have been there for a long time. They were there and taken advantage of by the Obama administration too. But I'd have to look that up. I don't remember clearly. A lot of people do, though. Yeah, the Consortium News is covering Assange. Thanks for that. Yeah, that is the place to look for Assange. The Consortium News. Probably independent media is covering it also. Now, it's great to see you also, Dr. Joe and Bonnie. Evelina says, funny about Bernie's wife, too. Haha. Kay says, my family is half Irish and half German. Bonnie's family is half German also. My adoptive dad came from Romania. What a mix. Laugh out loud. Must be culturally very interesting. Bunker Don / Basement Biden. They're both just old white men. They are. Avril says, I make it a point not to listen to Kamala. Her nasal sound irritates me like fingernails on a chalkboard. Alice says, never mind. Steve Gonzo says, it's true. I've seen the consent forms. Romania? Interesting, Kay. Avril says, oh, wow. Thanks for confirming. Kay says, yes, Evelina, he was a treasure to me. So lucky to have him as my dad. And Alice Little says, quote, we didn't vote for Hillary, unquote. Steve says, I don't subscribe to the notion it's voting your conscience if it's only because, okay, it doesn't matter. No, it does matter. It's not that, okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, it does matter because voting your conscience can strengthen the third parties. So it matters. It matters down ballot. Okay, it matters with respect to third parties. When it matters for the vote for the presidency, then you have to consider whether in not voting for Biden, you will be advantaging Donald Trump and increasing his chances, okay, of winning. Evelina says, Chris Hedges has a new book out, which is called America Farewell. I think that is what it's called, yes. He has a presentation on it at Politics and Prose bookstore in Washington, D.C. It's somewhere, okay, on YouTube, giving a presentation on it. Speaking of bills, any news advancement about the CARES Economic Recovery Bill 2.0? I think you mean the HEROES Act. There was a bit of news today saying that after the Problem Solvers Caucus started getting nervous and telling Nancy Pelosi there has to be another effort to pass a stimulus bill, to pass a recovery bill, to give people some relief before the election, because the problem-solving caucus of centrists is in trouble. They're afraid they're going to lose their seats. Okay? So they've come to Pelosi, and she tends to want to support them because they tend to support her, and she needs them as a counterweight, okay, to the progressives. So she wants them to remain in Congress. So she's like to make another attempt. So supposedly she's been talking to the administration. Trump wants to make another attempt too, because he wants stimulus checks out there. He wants to be able to put his name on those $1,200 checks to people again. And he thinks he really needs that, okay, for the election. He's desperate to win, and he wants to have that. And frankly, I think he's ready to cave to Pelosi. I think he's ready to cave. So he started pressuring Mitch McConnell, and we see if he can put enough pressure on Mitch to get Mitch to cave. He's probably going to say to Mitch, look, if I don't win, no more right-wing Supreme Court justices. You're done. You're done. He might also say, if I don't win, what are your chances of winning the Senate again? I mean, you think people are going to vote in a majority of GOP senators when they're not voting for me too? That's not going to happen. He'll probably say those things to him also. I mean, maybe he'll even say, look, I'll come to Kentucky and campaign against you, and Amy McGrath will win. If Amy McGrath wants to support my thing, I'll let her. Steve Gonzo says, I voted my conscience for Jill Stein, even though Trump won Ohio. Well, I don't know if that affected anything, okay, in Ohio. I think Trump had a decent majority in Ohio. That wasn't on the cusp. I don't think. It is, Kay, in many elections, but I don't think it was in 2016. Ira says, Evelina Punt, thanks. I like someone things he says, but he's too faithless for my taste. And Alvaro says, Jill is a sweetheart. Alvaro says, Consortium News is covering Assange. Thank you, Alvaro. I haven't looked at Consortium News, Kay, in a while, but they are a place that if anybody was covering Assange, they would. Evelina says, I don't know, Steve. Shouldn't voting your conscience matter to you unless there's a higher consideration? Don't know what that would be. Oh, by the way, I think there was a program on Assange on Rising as well. And you can look for The Intercept to cover Assange, too. They probably will do that also. I should have mentioned them before. And Jacobin, of course. Don't know what that would be, says Evelina. Well, it seems to me voting your conscience, if you're going to vote your conscience, that includes voting against the person you like best and for a person you like less in order to see to it that a monster is not going to be reelected. In other words, that is a conscience vote. In other words, even though I believe that Bernie Sanders was the best candidate for president, if I decide not to vote for Bernie Sanders, but to vote for Joe Biden in order to avoid Donald Trump as president, that is going to be a matter of conscience for me. I mean, conscience has to include the individual making what they consider to be a moral choice. And a moral choice is not always the best alternative for the job. It also has to include some considerations that are utilitarian. But Podesta and Hillary are both on the integrity think tank. Oh, yeah. Wonderful. That's wonderful. The integrity. The transition integrity panel, right? Yeah. There's going to be a lot of transition integrity there. Alvaro Mano says, yes, he does have a pessimistic vision. Apparently, he draws some dire conclusions in the book. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Evelina, I can take some pessimism, but not all the time. Chris is hard to take. There's no question it's hard to take. Alvaro says, he believes being overly optimistic is not in America's best interest. I agree with him. I don't think I'm overly optimistic, though. Some of you may think so, but I don't think so. I always try to be as realistic as I possibly can be. That doesn't mean being as pessimistic as I possibly can be. Alice Little says, thank you, my eyes are opened. I think of myself as a writer. I don't know how I did not make the association with Assange. I was blinded by my dislike for his actions. I'm so very wrong. Freedom of the press. Alice, remember, quite a lot of your dislike of Assange may be coming from the mainstream coverage of his, which since 2010 has been thoroughly devoted to blackening his name and by reputation. There are people out there, people who will seem to you to be good people, true people, who think tremendously highly of Assange, who think that Assange is a true hero, someone who is making the ultimate sacrifice for democracy, and who admire him so greatly. But John Pilger, for example, by Jennifer Robinson, one of his attorneys. When they talk about Assange in personal terms, you will see that they think he is a person of the highest character. And they don't believe the actions that have been attributed to him in the mainstream press over the last 10 years. From their point of view, what you see in the mainstream press and what you hear on the cable stations, those to them are smears reflecting the propaganda of the deep state and the intelligence agencies. That's what they think. Avro says, Boots are harassing journalists here too. I think they just busted a woman journalist in California. I wish I could remember the details, but it was in the news just yesterday. Steve Gonza says Australia has already raided TV stations. Evelina says he's not exactly a traitor. He's Australian after all. Yeah, I mean, he's not a traitor to the United States in any way. He's an Australian citizen. And by the way, he's still an Ecuadorian citizen. In letting the UK forces come in and get him out of the embassy, what Ecuador was doing was allowing the violation of the rights of one of its citizens, because under the regime before the present one, okay, in Ecuador, Julian Assange was given dual citizenship in Ecuador, in addition to the citizenship he has from Australia, his native citizenship. So he's a dual citizen. If the regime ever changes again, okay, in Ecuador, he's going to be perfectly welcome there if he wants to go there. Of course, he might consider it dangerous, considering what happened to him, but Guccifer 2.0 was CIA a hack to finger Russia. Probably. Al says, oh, I am not shamed. I shame them right back. I ask them if they are in trouble with their back channels, then they do not wield the power they need to hold. Alvaro says he was the Romanian, no? And Kay says, Dems are lucky to get my holding my nose votes. Oh, God. Dems are lucky to get my holding my nose vote. Sure not giving them any of my too small Social Security money. Dems can get the same thing I gave a sweaty male stripper named Salty Dog. A damn table napkin in his thigh boot. Steve Gonzo says U.S. prosecutors are reportedly refusing to cooperate with a Spanish investigation into the company accused of spying on Julian Assange while he sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy unless the judge accedes to a list of demands. Huh. Interesting. Alvaro says, we're getting yet another hurricane named Teddy. I've been migraines every day. Alvaro says, Heroes Bill, yes, thanks. Alvaro says, been having migraines, correction. Steve Gonzo says, I think we're up to 7 tropical hurricane depressions. Alice Little says, oh, geez, I do hope Amy McGrath wins. Alvaro points out that Mitch McConnell has been placing in judges while we're distracted all week. I know he's been doing that. And Alice says, we've reached Greek, I think. Evelina Pond says, happy to know Spain is investigating. Thanks for the tip, Steve. Alvaro says, why, she's a neoliberal garbage, too. The last stimulus check got me kicked off of Medicaid. Not that I don't want the money, but it will have to end up in my can. Shake my head. Steve says, the Biden record, I don't negotiate with domestic terrorists. Kay says, I haven't been optimistic in years. Shake my head. This country is corrupt. And Steve says, Katie Johnstone has debunked all the fabricated smears in one article. I'll bet Katie has. Alvaro says, can't you reapply for your Medicaid? I heard the economic recovery wasn't supposed to count against safety net programs. For instance, my roommate didn't lose her stamps nor Medicaid, so I'm baffled why you were penalized. Alice still asks, domestic terrorists like Kyle Rittenhouse. Yep, Kyle Rittenhouse is certainly a domestic terrorist, having killed 2 people with an AR-15 and wounded a 3rd. Well, there we have it. I've gone through all the comments. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. It was a fun time for me. I hope it was a fun time for you. I hope the Hulk came out, Avro. I hope the Hulk came out. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be putting up some more short takes tomorrow. I may be cutting another short take tomorrow as well, if I have the time. Kay says, yes, I'm going to reapply, but need my bank statements as they will want copies. I think expanded Medicaid is different state to state. Here in Ohio, it's a scam to keep you poor. Never had any problems when I lived in Arizona. Dolores says, thank you and good night all. Alice says, it was lively. Thanks for the education. I apologize for being short-sighted on Assange. No problems. So, we debate here. I hope that there's no hard feelings. Okay. In other words, we debate. We disagree. The whole point of this is stability. We try to keep those norms here on this program, but we try to do it in a vigorous way. We try not to call anybody names. I don't care for the name calling and stuff. I don't do a lot of that. Kay says, thank you, Joe, and everybody. Great discussion. But love you all. We love you too, Kay. Good night. Alice says, I actually loved Assange until he torpedoed the election, in my opinion. I thought he'd been bought off by Trump. No, nobody buys Assange. Steve Gonzo says, less than 3. Avril says, have a safe and restful night. Good night again, everyone.